Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to Face the Nation. Elections are around the corner and leadership is not about the next elections, it is about the next generation. However, one reason why people hate politics is the fact that the truth is not generally the objective of politicians, and that scenario applies to here in Sri Lanka as well. But however, elections and power are. With the advent of the imminent election, people in this country will be able to see more politicians coming up on stage, more promises being made, and more election manifestos coming out. Although today we thought of making a bit of a difference here on Face the Nation. Instead of bringing to you politicians that you see on your television day in and day out, we've got a healthy mixture of professionals as well as political hopefuls in this country who will hopefully one day, or who are hoping to one day, lead this country. So without further ado, let's get to introducing our eminent panel of guests for this evening. On my immediate right, we've got Dr. Charitha Herath. He is a senior lecturer at the University of Peradeniya. Very good evening, sir, and welcome to the show. Also, on his immediate left, we've got Mr. Rohan Pallewatta. He is a presidential candidate. He is the political hopeful that I was speaking to you about. And on his right, we've got Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardena. He's an advisor to the Ministry of Policy Planning. A very good evening, sir, and a very warm welcome to you to the Face the Nation. Right, so as usual, starting off our discussion, we will allow each of our eminent guests a short time period to make their opening remarks. And I would like to start with the gentleman on my immediate right, Dr. Charitha Herath, senior lecturer at the University of Peradeniya. So what is your initial analysis of the current trajectory of the country in the lead up to what would be potentially a crossroads for all of us Sri Lankans?
Well, actually now we are in a last lap of this government, and this is very timely, important topic that you brought in, the elections. Actually, first thing that I would like to make, or first observation that I would like to make, is that we are in a very difficult and very pathetic situation with regard to elections under this so-called Yahapalana government. This is the second time in our known history that we are facing this kind of situation without having the people's requested kind of elections in hand. In 1982, I think some of you would still remember that we had a situation where we didn't have election till 12 odd years, and after that in 1987 that we got the elections after 89 after 1977. The same situation was indicating after the Yahapalana government came into power in 2015. You may know that we were struggling to get the local government elections, and finally it was it was given, and then the mandate was completely opposite of the incumbent government. Then the country and the people wanted to experience their provincial council elections. Now almost all the provincial council are now in a kind of, nutshell kind of vacuum, and many of these provincial councils were now handled and governed by the appointed governors appointed by the president. So now those elections were not held, and the very important, very interesting argument was brought by the government parties that there were some issues with the regulations, and you just need to fix those things before the elections will be called off. But we all know that they are lying, and we know that the government knows that they are lying, and we know that they are lying, and people knows that the government is lying. So we are in a situation where, like we are waiting for rain, we are just waiting for elections. I think one import election is going to come in before end of this year, that is the presidential elections, and I think it would be the time that people could experience their rights to select and reject the governing process of this country. I think end of the process, people are the main resource, and people are the main owners of democratic system. That representative democracy should be practiced in these elections.
Well, definitely it should be a government of the people, by the people and for the people. That is the textbook definition of it. It seems as if, Dr. Herath, you are quite eager to face an election, are you?
Well, yes. I mean, I think now time has come to go into the front from the different kind of social sectors. I'm thinking that I also need to join in this political process. Yes.
Definitely, we will get back to you right after we speak with Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, next presidential candidate. How eager are you to face an election?
Well, I think since the topic is elections, I'm also the leader of a party called Social Democratic Party of Sri Lanka. And then there are more than 70 registered political parties in the country at the moment. So why another new party? So when you come out with a new political party, there should be some defined, salient features where none of these already registered parties are having at the moment. So we recognize 14 such salient features in our manifesto. And the first one is addressing the democracy deficit. So now elections, I may be carrying course in Newcastle, but then elections are a salient feature of any democracy. Now I think I'm compelled to refer to Act number 17 of 2017. They introduced a new electoral system, and then in order to get this off ground, they needed a new delimitation. And when they were commissioned to do that, and when the bill was presented to the Parliament, even the very minister who presented the bill, for the first time in our history, he voted against the bill. So this cast a serious doubt whether this was manipulated, because the fundamental salient features of a democracy, as I said, once again I'm reiterating, I'm underlining, are elections. So therefore, the institutional mechanisms can be manipulated. So are they manipulating the institutional mechanisms to postpone the elections? Is it that they do not want to stand this acid test? So these are the questions that we have to ask on behalf of the people, on behalf of the citizens of this country. Because every time that we postpone elections, because it happened in 1975, it happened, as Dr. Herath said, it happened in 1982. Instead of having a presidential election, we opted for a referendum. The politicians opted for a referendum, not the people. But we saw how the youth who had faith in the political system deviated from the democratic process, and how they revolt against taking arms against the existing system. So every time that we delay an election, the gush out of emotions happens in a socially harmful way. So that is why elections must be held when they are due. And when it is not so, as I said, the emotion gush out will be detrimental to the formation of this nation.
So, Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, you've put yourself out there as a presidential candidate. I'd say that's quite a bold move, given the fact that no other political party has quite come forward with their candidates. Don't you feel that you are exposing yourself prematurely?
Well, for the known candidates, they can come out at the 11th hour because they are known through the media. But for a newcomer like me, you have to make your presence felt. And it's an uphill task, I know that. But then we do not have any choice, because this corrupt system will not be corrected by an accident. It is the effort of a few people who can come forward, raise their hands and challenge the system, that can send this corrupt system back home.
Thank you very much, sir. Moving on, up next, Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardena. You're an advisor to the Ministry of Policy Planning. Out of the members in the panel, you are the person who is most closely connected to this current government. We've seen a lot of allegations being leveled as far as the failure of holding elections goes. What is your take? Should there be an election? Should we postpone it any further?
I think elections are the most important feature in any democracy. And also, according to our constitution, sovereignty lies with the people. And sovereignty expressed in through three ways. One is the governmental power. It is exercised through the people's executive power, people's legislative power, and people's judicial power. To elect the government, you need the election, so then the people's franchise is the second phase of the sovereignty, along with the fundamental rights. So sovereignty is elections in a sense. So sovereignty cannot be taken away. So elections are inherent right of the people. But there was a situation, unfortunate times in our history, we have witnessed postponement of elections. Dr. Herath, my friend Charita, actually mentioned, but I think he forgot to mention 1975. By accident or by design, I don't know. But Rohan actually brought it in. In 1975, election was due. But then government decided not to hold elections for the fact that they thought, okay, they brought in new constitution in 1972, and according to that, they argued that the National People's Assembly will run until 1977. There was no recourse at that point. Again, the local government elections was due, if I am not mistaken, by 1973. That was also had been postponed. No local government elections. And country was ruled by the emergency. In 1977, UNP came into power, and UNP brought in new constitution. That constitution actually guaranteed the elections, because the constitution provided, on one hand it says that the franchise is one of the part of the sovereignty, and it says that two major elections, that is the presidential elections and the parliament election, should happen by 6 years. After 6 years you can't extend, the parliament will dissolve itself, if not dissolved, and presidential election will have to happen. So I think that was brought in by the 1978 constitution. I think we have to give that due respect. I think that was a result of that postponement of election in 1975. And late Mr. Jayawardena, he resigned from his seat in 1975 and contested in by-election and won again. Having said that, I think it's a mistake by that government to postpone the 1982 election. It had to happen, but they still went through the constitutional means. They went through a referendum process, which I don't think it's even though it's illegal, I don't think it's a legitimate thing. So now what's happening is, actually the elections are due in couple of months. The major election, presidential election, and also parliamentary election will happen in after the completion of 5 years of the present parliament. So that is also giving some kind of a certainty. Once the people elect the parliament, not according to the whims and fancies of even the executive, it cannot be dissolved. It will dissolve on due course. So I think in principle elections should happen. I don't see any reason these two major elections is not going to happen, because according to the constitution is provided, and we will have to actually go for that elections. The two elections that mentioned, one is local government election and also provincial council elections, not as important as the presidential and parliamentary, and there was a background to that, because there was a process of changing the electoral system, which was also long felt, and there was a mandate to change the electoral system.
Mr. Gunawardena, I think we've, the first round or the opening statements from our eminent panelist has focused much on the history and the background of how elections were conducted in Sri Lanka, how the election system quite evolved, and how the sovereignty of the people was eventually guaranteed. Hopefully this next round, which involves question and answer from our panel of journalists, would be forthcoming and forward-thinking in the presentations made by our eminent panelists. Without further ado, let me move on to introducing the journalists on tonight's show. On my immediate left, we've got Deshan Gonavala, and on his left, we've got Mr. Shehan Ranatunga. Gentlemen, over to you.
I'm wondering how to start. I think the best way to start is, let's face it, when you look at the current context and this current government and how things stand, I think the word confusion is appropriate. There is no unity, and there is so many discussions happening between various parties. There's supposedly an election around the corner, but no official statement has been made, whether it's a provincial council, general or presidential, still unofficially announced, or rather unofficial. And then we have all these underlying issues that have been growing over time. You know, you can talk about things like the Boeing scam, all these investigations over Sri Lankan Airlines and allegations of corruption and nepotism and murder from the previous regime and then even the current regime. You have energy crisis, you've got fraud, corruption, as I said. Then you had recently the April attacks. And while those investigations are going on, now there's talks about the 19th Amendment and issues about that. The President spoke about the death penalty. So all there is a lot of problems, but no solutions. Mr. Herath, if I can first talk to you, where are we headed? The Sri Lanka Freedom Party and the Sri Lanka Podujana Party have been having discussions, but there have been 6 rounds of talks, but still no agreement, no resolution, no consensus. What's going on in your understanding?
Well, actually those two parties are having discussions to see how they can form a kind of common ground. But as you know, like there were many differences, and sometimes even some parts of the parties were not willing into getting into the common ground due to different reasons. But that discussions are still going on. That is what I can share with you right now.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what you think those disagreements are? Is it about the actual presidential candidate? Is it that the SLFP wants the president?
Well, I am not here to talk on behalf of any party of that too, but I can feel and I can share with you what I feel on this thing. I think it was not about the candidates. I think it is a known fact that candidate should be brought by the SLPP. That is a known fact at the moment, and if the discussion are between SLPP and SLFP, I think SLPP will bring the candidates. But there are some other issues as well. And even in some time, some leaders of some parties were not supportive of these discussions in their talks. Especially, I have seen that the president of the country, the leader of the SLFP, sometime indicating that he is not willing to support the SLPP candidates as well. So that is a kind of like a statement of one leader of the one party. So those things are also matters, but I don't want to go into those details. But I can say that there is a discussion between these two parties, and discussions are continuing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but even the SLPP is conflicted about who their presidential candidate is.
Well, I mean, you can see it from outside, but within the party and within the structure of that that political setup, there aren't any doubt, any issues on that thing. They have couple of candidates in their hands, and they will bring the most suitable, most possible winning candidates into the elections. That's not a big issue for themselves, but you know, still that official statements were not made like in other parties, because we all parties are now working on many different other things, policy formations and getting some support arms and connecting with other parties, and those are the kind of works at the moment that those parties are in. But when as my good friend Sudarshan said, that if the announcements will come as we expect, then the parties will definitely come forward and give their candidates to the country.
Mr. Pallewatta, I want to pose a question to you. Mr. Gunawardena said that the general election, the presidential election are far more important than the provincial and local elections. Do you agree? You are a person who wants to contest the presidency.
Any election is important for that matter, because we can't undermine, we can't categorize and say, because why should we have unimportant elections in this country? Because my personal take is that 13th Amendment was shoved down the throat of this country. So we have to have a separate debate on that, the relevance and what it contributes to the country. So therefore, based on that, if you ask me based on that, if provincial councils are necessary, my private take is, because I am an entrepreneur, and if there is any layer in my company that does not add value to my company, tomorrow I will get rid of that.
Of course.
So if there is a structure in our political system that does not add value, and the state coffers has to bear a colossal amount of money to sustain that, I think we should get rid of that.
Presidential candidate Pallewatta's side, citizen Pallewatta, if he were to answer this question, why do you think there has been a postponing of elections? Because a regime that was deemed far more authoritarian, they had elections rather frequently.
Sure.
Why do you see that this regime has been postponing elections?
I think
what can you gain?
They fear this acid test. They do not want to put it to the public and seek the mandate again, because they are not sure of themselves. And also, even today, the Prime Minister had made the statement saying that he cannot have provincial council elections by the 30th of September due to certain legal impediments. But that statement itself is a callous disregard to the rights, democratic rights of the people of this country. So that is what exactly we are propagating, that is what exactly we are standing against.
So as the Social Democratic Party and the leader of that party, you are advocating that the provincial council elections as scheduled take place before the presidential elections?
Well, any election for that matter should be taken place according to the the laws of the country.
Mr. Gunawardena, what do you have to say on this? Because this is an allegation that's been thrown about quite a bit, that elections are not held because essentially the government rather is afraid of the response that will come about through the people, and as a person who's involved with the government to a certain degree at least, you should be able to respond and tell us, is that really the case? Is that what the government thinks?
Well, Deshan, I cannot speak for a political party.
Of course.
But as Charita mentioned, since I'm working for the government, I can also state that position, not speaking on behalf of a party. First, I want to distinguish these two elections. As Rohan said, okay, any elections is important, that's fine. But the constitution provided for certain elections to be held on time. Without amending the constitution, you can't change that. Even you can't just do the simple amendment, you have to go through a referendum.
Okay.
So presidential and parliamentary are such elections. So I think we have to distinguish based on that constitutional provisions. There is no such constitutional provisions for the local government elections or the provincial council elections. What happened in 2015, the common candidate was put forward by a broad coalition led by a civil society movement initiated by late Venerable Sopita Thera. That movement actually called for far-reaching changes to address some of the problems the country has been facing. So one is the democracy deficit, as Rohan also mentioned. To address democracy deficit, certain measures had to be taken One is to make sure that elections are held in free and fair manner.
Yeah.
The earlier system gave the ruling party an undue advantage because they managed to use the state resources, state media and state power.
State media is not used nowadays.
No, I'm not. I'm saying is that during election time, I'm just focusing on the election. Election time, they used it. I hope Charita would not object to my statement here.
I think the
But
former president also agrees with you, so you're fine.
Yeah. So therefore, we wanted to make a change. So this independent election commission was brought in.
Yeah.
And commission is empowered to make sure that during election, even ruling party cannot get undue advantage. So state media.
Mr. Gunawandana, but we are deviating a bit from the initial question. The initial question was regarding Mr. Pallewatta's statement that the ruling party and the government is afraid of going to the people. Now, I understand the context of it.
Yes.
But now you are at a situation where the elections commissioner himself is saying unless the provincial council elections are going to be held, that he will resign. In the face of a situation like this, is it possible that the government is stopping the elections commission from doing their job? Because why else would the elections commissioner resign? Because the commission is supposed to be independent.
Exactly.
What's holding it back?
No, that's the point. That's the problem. That now, if you take the parliamentary election, no government can change the date.
Of course.
Even the presidential, you can't do it.
Correct.
So that even commissioner has said by November it has to happen. Before 8th of December it has to happen.
Realistically, do you see the provincial council elections happening before the presidential elections?
No, I don't see at the moment because of this legal issue. Because there has been a request for a change. Now the elections are fought on the PR system, and for the local government there was introduction of the mixed system, and it was introduced in 2013 but could not be implemented. 2011, I think 2011 under the last government. This was introduced into the local government system, and this election was held without these preferential votes.
Right.
And local government, the provincial council is also supposed to go through the same phase, and also inclusion of the women, mandatory
of course,
women
that's
candidates.
a great move. Yeah.
So that's
it's a brilliant move. Yeah.
Yeah. So because of that, that process could not be completed, and also there was a belief that you do elections, all local government election, all provincial council elections at one phase.
Okay.
So these were the reasons.
Okay.
I still think that it's not an excuse.
Yeah.
It should have happened. It should have happened earlier. But now I think, given that close proximity for the presidential election, I think everybody is set for the presidential election. No party is actually fighting for provincial council election at the moment. No party is actually asking.
I wanted to move to Dr. Herath on that note. Dr. Herath, you see a lot of the opposition members say give us any election. Through your affiliations, through your knowledge on politics and the civil society movements that have gathered around the opposition, do you think the opposition does not want the provincial council election anymore? Or
well now actually I would agree with you that we need elections as oppositions and as citizens of this country, and actually it was said that this particular regime should be better than what we had under our regime or what we had before 2015. Then people were more keen to see that whether their rights will be given back to them to decide, even to look at the balance sheet of this particular government and whether they have done a good job or not. Actually that was given back to the stakeholdership, like this is like a company. Like the stakeholders are the people of the country, and you are a kind of director board type of arrangement. So that you are supposed to go back to the real shareholders to look at that how they feel about your work. I think though Sudarshan has been trying to explain legality and technicality and all this kind of things of this thing, as I said from the beginning, we all know that this is not true at all. and it is not my friend's fault, but it is the fact, and the country knows that government is lying, and we know that the other party is not willing to come into the people. I would like to take the same example that my friend Sudarshan said, that J.R. Jayawardena at that time, I agree that in 1975 government had done that particular mistakes, and then they didn't have the elections in due time, and late president, or at that time opposition leader Jayawardena, resigned from his electorate in southern Colombo, and contested the by-elections. He won remarkably handsomely, and there was one very interesting statement that he made, Sudarshan, after he came out from Colombo district divisional secretariats. He came out and he said to the media that Mrs. Bandaranaike's government is dead. Now it is confirmed that it is dead. You can do the cremation either today or after 2 years, but look at the smell. Doing a cremation, a dead body after 2 years would be much higher than what you are doing today. The same thing happened in 2018 February in this country, where the local elections were held, and this incumbent government was handsomely defeated by the oppositions, even without a party at that time. The first time that the party, without having a kind of traditional party background, but with the traditional leaders, had done that. Now at that time, even I have declared the same thing that I brought from late Jayawardena, and said that this government was dead. You can do the cremation today or after 2 years or after some years, but the smells would be much higher. The
Dr.
same
Herat,
thing.
Before you go on, Shalan, I just want to pose this one question to Mr. Pallewatta. Mr. Pallewatta, you are neither in opposition or in government, and you've had an opportunity of actually looking at the bests of both sides and also criticizing whenever they've stepped out of line.
Sure.
Do you feel that when it comes to the concept of democracy,
Yes.
within the spectrum of politics in our country, that what consists of a democracy, a vibrant democracy, and what doesn't consist of a vibrant democracy is picked and chosen based on the whims and fancies of those, based on the situation? You saw in October,
Yes.
that when the constitutional coup took place, there's a loud cry for democracy.
Sure.
But today, you don't see one of the key aspects of democracy, an election, being given its due place because of legality.
Sure. Now, when you refer to this 26th October incident, I think if the Supreme Court held that the head of state had violated the constitution.
Correct.
So, which means he had violated the fundamental law of the country.
Correct.
So, I have to state this very clear and straightforward. Once you violate the constitution, he does not have the right to remain as president. Rightly, the people are incapacitated to stand against this. Even a blatant violation of the constitution by the head of state has gone, and still he is continuing to be the president of this country.
That's why I'm asking you, do you think there's a selection of what consists of democracy and what isn't democratic?
Exactly, because the Greens and Blues, right, they have been playing with the rights of the people for so many years, and that is the reason that there is a imminent birth of a new voice, a new generation, right, a new populace to fight this careless disregard of the sentiments of the people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, and also a big thank you out to our journalist. Well, when politics is no longer a public service and it is a profession, politicians rely more on their welfare or work better for their welfare. It's not I who say this, it was President Emmanuel Macron from France. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more on Face the Nation. Ensuring a bright future for our country, a bright future for the children of this country is the responsibility of their families, their communities, the schools, and unfortunately but inevitably the responsibility of politicians themselves. With elections looming, as I said before, you'll see many politicians come up on stage and make promises to you. Today, however, on our panel, as I mentioned before as well, we've got a healthy mix of professionals and political newcomers into the field. Getting back to our panel discussion, Dr. Charitha Herath, drawing a little bit from what you said in the previous rounds, we had a broad discussion of the election history, and I do not believe it would be fair for me to question you regarding the upcoming candidates, the policies that the parties will put forward, because leading members of those parties, of these leading political parties, have still not come forward with their candidates, their policies, how they are going to face an election. And in that aspect, of course, Mr. Rohan Pallewatta is leaps and bounds ahead of him with, I see, a manifesto in your hand as well. However, first going to Dr. Charitha Herath. So you were speaking about going to the people, the real shareholders of this country. But my question to you is, at the end of the term of this government, do you believe that the people of this country will still be the shareholders of this country? Or will the real shareholders of this country be the citizens of China, the government of China, the government of America, of India, of Japan? All these foreign nations that are struggling for geopolitical superiority in the region, are they going to be the real shareholders of this country?
It is very, very interesting way that you put the issue. Actually, there's a big and very serious issue on this sections. After 2015, actually, there were many different agreements were signed. I know that there were some interventions to Sri Lankan economy from China and from the region was there even before this government came into power. But after 2015, I think the market economy was turned into a very different directions of this country. This is a very politically important issue. Before 2015, in my reading, was that the state intervention into the governing affairs were more specific and more important than after 2015. Now it is completely market driven economy and completely market prominent country at the moment, and that market shares were taken by some outsiders, like you said, China and some other countries. So this is a big issue for a country like Sri Lanka in future. But my point was that still the main stakeholder of this country is the people of this country, and they should be given right back to them for voting or looking at evaluating what the government has done in this 5 years. I think it was not given due to many different technical reasons by the government, but the real reason was that they don't want to go into people. But as Sudarshan said, that it seems that we are going to have the presidential elections, since it could not be able to manipulate or able to postpone or able to do anything with that part according to the constitutions, which is really good. Your first kind of introduction to your questions, you said that main two parties were not still unveiling their candidates and things like that. I think though, I mean, their main parties are having many different kind of issues at the moment, and there are different kind of leaders within party systems. I think almost within the party structures, they know that who the guy going to take the issue, and I think especially if I would say something about SLPP. SLPP is working on its manifesto, and we have appointed different kind of committees to work on those things, and we are having very rich internal discussions at the moment on the economic policies and on foreign affairs and things like
Dr.
that.
Herat, now you were demanding for provincial council elections to be held. You said that the local government elections were postponed so far and they were held anyways. Now, there's no doubt consensus on the fact that elections should be held. But just taking a look back at what happened after the local government elections that were held in February 2018, the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna promised a whole page change for the country. They said, we will bring about change starting from this election. What change has the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna brought about in the country through winning a landslide victory, as you mentioned yourself, at the local government elections?
No, at the moment we have started all the local government activities under the new setups, and you know that almost all the internal activities of local governments were shut down due to not having elections at the same time. And you know, the issues like starting from waste management up to...
But however, there were reports that local government institutions were most profitable during the time that they ran without politicians in
That's
them.
a different point, because you know, if you have bureaucrats in the center, if you don't have any democratic discussion system, but you know that we are not.
But isn't the whole thing counterproductive?
No, but you know, the democracy has some issues in that regard, because you know, you can't just leave the divisions up to a kind of, you know, bureaucrat's hands.
Then I believe we'll just have to agree on the fact that democracy in Sri Lanka is by far the most expensive product in the country.
That is true. You have to, it is very, very expensive. Like governing by discussion is difficult than governing by one hand.
But then there is, of course, a question of our return on investment. I would like to move to Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, the presidential hopeful. One thing that I strongly believe is that Sri Lankans have never voted in a government. Sri Lankans would always focus on voting out a government. And when the opposition launched their campaign as well, I saw parliamentarian Dala Salaha Peruma coming out and saying that the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, we are launching a 100 days program, and I was wondering whether it's going to be another 100 days program like this government initially launched. But no, it was a 100 days program to remove this government from power. Do you believe that the mainstream political parties or the mainstream opposition parties are too focused on voting out this government, that they are not focused enough on voting themselves in or getting themselves voted into government?
I think you are touching a very salient feature of democracy, because now when we elect a government, they have a, you know, constitutionally they have a certain period. I think it is the responsibility of any political party, even though they are in the opposition, to help the existing government to perform their duties to the letter. Because it is the government of the people, because people elect them into power. And then if you have plans, 100-day plans or 200-day plans, just prior to the end, of course you can have your political activities, but then there is a fine line between. You have to understand, because even myself, when they were formulating the digital economic strategy, Prime Minister's office invited me. When I went there, people wanted to know, if you are not aligning with any of them, why are you going there? But the McKenzies from Singapore were already present in the country. So my take was that when the government is there, and if they are bringing in resources, you have to help them optimize so that the country would benefit. So that is the kind of responsibility that is called upon these political parties. You should help the existing government until their tenure. Of course, at the elections you can oppose them, because this is taking a huge blow. Our economy is taking a huge blow because the pulling back of the existing governments.
Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, transparency in Sri Lanka has not been Sri Lanka's most prominent or most strong suit of politicians here in Sri Lanka. Would you give us a guarantee that you will release your asset declarations before the presidential election, or would you make it public?
Well, definitely I will make it public. Not only that, I will make it public. I will be proud to show my nation the taxes that I pay as a corporate and as an individual.
There are only 7 parliamentarians who have made their asset declarations public. There are 225 in Parliament. Where are the rest?
Good question.
Why do you think they won't release their? It's a rhetorical question, of course.
Yeah.
But give me your simplest take on why do you think they do not want to release their asset declarations?
Maybe they have in their mind, because they do not have a limit in the amount of money that they are going to, assets they are going to accumulate during their tenure, and that is why they do not want to declare prematurely, because they do not know the limit that they are going to accumulate. That is the only answer that I can see.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pallewatta. Now, moving on to Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardena. Of course, being in government is not quite the easiest thing. There are so many responsibilities that you need to fulfill. But unfortunately, this government came in on a bandwagon of promises, so many promises of good governance. Do you honestly, as a citizen, believe that this government has delivered at least a fraction of what they promised the general public?
Well, I believe that this government has delivered certain amount of, not even fraction, certain amount of the promises. It's a glass half full, glass half empty situation. If you look at the original movement, the movement came with a one single slogan, that is to abolish executive presidency. That's why all the parties came together and put forward a single candidate. Even though we could not abolish executive presidency, and even though the people who actually promised to do that now basically saying something else, but still we have come long way to address the democracy deficit.
But
Unfortunately, media
you
is
said
not,
it's a glass half full, half empty situation. But I believe what the important factor that the people are missing out is what is in the glass.
it is in the glass. I can tell you, for example,
Is it water or poison? You said through the 19th Amendment the objective was to abolish the executive presidency, but instead it resulted in a situation where there was a constitutional deadlock. And we cannot forget the fact that at the time the 19th Constitution was initially presented, there were attempts by the government to include certain clauses that would allow them to curb free media in this country. And you know, it's a common secret that this government has been after this government has been after the legal rights of freedom of expression of the general public quite from the start. Although they did pass the Right to Information Act, that credit should be given. But however, through the 19th Amendment, again, there were provisions that were struck down by the Supreme Court. So, I mean, how can you speak about all of this when, you know, the executive presidency is still quite existent? And the situation of the country is that we are in a constitutional deadlock. The president cannot even remove the Inspector General of Police from power.
well, you are asking me too many questions and giving little time to answer, so I don't know where to pick my answers. First, I think media is not giving due respect to what we have achieved from the 19th Amendment. The creation of independent commissions itself is a step forward, and the judiciary was made independent, because earlier under the 18th Amendment the judiciary, all judicial appointments to the superior courts were made by the executive president, who is leader of a party. Now there is a very transparent, open process for that, and the Attorney General, IGP, so IGP is responsible for the investigations, Attorney General is responsible for the prosecutions, and the judiciary has made independent. And during the coup, these institutions were held, and even now the opponents also admit these institutions were held, and they are operating far more independently than it was before, and even internationally accepted. That's one reason in Human Rights Council that when the government proposed that we will address these issues through a domestic mechanism, it was acknowledged because this democracy deficit was addressed. So by way of making independent of these institutions and also creating independent commissions, election commission, the human rights commission, I think we have done a lot. Unfortunately, people do not recognize, and right to information itself is a huge achievement which the previous governments actually refused to enact, but this was brought in. So therefore, we have set a foundation for a sound governance. There is so much issues because there is a debt issue, so we have to address the debt issue, and also institutions were very much politicized. So I think you can't expect miracles. But now, if I may go back to what Charita has mentioned, Charita said that this government is dead, paraphrasing President Jayawardena. I don't really think so, because even though the new party, the opposition formed, managed to grab most of the local government bodies, the forces that came forward in 2015, they actually contested separately. If you take these numbers collectively, still they stand far ahead of the opposition that captured these councils. And how it was possible? Also because of this independent election system. There were no incidents during the elections, no violence, no complaints of the using of the public resources or the public media or whatever. So I think we have to acknowledge these things. So these changes were brought in, and if they were so confident about the power and facing people, I wonder why the same party, the leadership, decided to participate in a coup and decided to take the premiership and the government from the back door. If they were so confident, if they were so sure of their victory, they could have agitated for elections, and at the elections they would have sailed into that. So why? Because there is a doubt, because there is a lack of numbers. They have peaked at 40 to 45%, but the problem is you have to get 50% plus what? That was the problem for them. I think therefore it is not simple as such.
Mr. Gunawardena, I believe you brought in an interesting perspective to all of this. A landslide victory at the local government election, does it really mean that the opposition, including the joint opposition with the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, is ahead of the other forces, or will this election see a new candidate, a new face such as Mr. Rohan Pallewatta coming in on top? We've got more details. For that, I'd like to direct our attention now to the panel of journalists. Your questions can be directed now.
I think I'll start off with offering Dr. Heyrath an opportunity to provide some perspective into some of the comments that Mr. Gunawardena made. I think we'll start from there.
Yeah, actually it's very important point that Sudarshan made in, like, he wanted to know why we accepted President's invitation when the President wanted Mr. Rajapaksa to become Prime Minister in October last year. I think it was a very different scenario. It was not that we want to get back to kind of arrangement to capture the power. As we have been arguing throughout this period, we want to contest elections, no hide it at all. Like, we wanted elections, and the government that it is government that was not given that chance. So that was the reason that we have been struggling to get provincial council elections on due time. It was not our fault that we don't want to get into power in any backdoor channels in our future or in our past. But at that time, President's invitation should be considered as a considerable opposition group. Then it was taken, and when the decision was questioned by the judiciary systems, then Prime Minister Rajapaksa resigned. And we are engaging with democratic systems, as your Prime Minister accepted that, he just came back to power. We don't have any doubt on our take that we will go into people, and with our political campaign we will get the mandate in next election. And if the government is so confident on this thing, I think they have to just go into very simple thing, that they can go to any provincial council elections. I know that this government would never do that thing until they could, go into whatever the road that they want to go. It is true that we all have to face the presidential elections end of this year, and we are now hoping and waiting for that. And the same time that 50% one thing is true, and we know that very well, and we want to challenge the government that if you are confident on your balance sheet, and if you are confident on what you have done, the thing is open. We are willing to give our votes to general elections if they bring any resolution into the parliament, or if they will bring the provincial council elections, then we are going to contest over the presidential. No problem at all. We are very open and confident about our...
Mr. Pallewatta, I want to give you an opportunity now. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution has drastically reduced the powers of the President.
Yes.
Firstly, I would like a yes or no answer. When somebody asks you, are you for the abolition of the presidency and the movement towards a parliamentary democracy, is that a yes or a no?
My straight answer is no.
No, you're not.
Yes.
So you're for a presidential system of governance, right? Now, under the 19th Amendment, a lot of the powers that were vested in the President have been taken away and given to commissions and to Parliament.
Yes.
Now, a very reasonable question that a lot of people have, like a lot of these civil movements, a lot of these civil movements tend to fizz out because they don't really get the backing they need from the general public. Now, for you to make meaningful change in Sri Lanka and to meaningfully and sustainably change this country, you need to be able to get things through Parliament.
Sure.
Do you think that, assuming, say you do win the presidential election, the chances of either the SLFP, UPFA, SLPP faction or the UNP, SLMC, that faction, coming and working with you, the chances are pretty slim. So you'll have to go for a general election. Do you think that realistically you have the opportunity to take on structured political parties, parties which have loyal voter bases and are led by charismatic figures who have a reputation in this country and are loved by the people that support them? Do you think that you can realistically take them on and gain a sustainable number in substantial number in Parliament that will contribute to actually making your governance an effective governance? Or will you just be a president who doesn't really have a side, who's going to have to, kick about and put up with whatever the Prime Minister says?
Well, Deshan, now, first part of your question, that is about the 19th Amendment, the limitation of the power of the President, Executive. Well, when 19th Amendment was before the Supreme Court, they did not approve everything that was in there.
Right.
Right. Still, the President will be the head of state.
Of course.
He will be head of the cabinet.
Correct.
And so on and so forth. So the fundamental power that 19th Amendment sought to remove from the President was not removed.
Correct.
So, and also we have to remember that the executive in this country has a direct mandate from the people.
Right.
So therefore, when there is a direct mandate from the people, there is a conflict when the legislature is trying to limit that. So usually the executive is answerable directly to the people of the country.
Right.
That is one thing. The second part of your question.
Just to clarify why I ask you that is because there is such a clash at the moment.
Sure.
Well. But yes, go on please.
Sure. Second part, whether I can take on, or we can take on the structured parties of this country. The clear answer is yes. Because for the first time in our history, as I said, just prior to an election, there will always, even especially a presidential election, the contest polarizes between two candidates. For the past 71 years, it has been between the Greens and the Blues. But mark my word, for the first time in the history of this country, once again, of course, it will polarize down to two camps, but not between the Greens and Blues. It is between the people who oppose this stenching, corrupt system and the people who want a new system in this country.
Mr. Pallewatta, there is significant structural change that needs to happen.
Sure.
And it takes significant knowledge about governance.
Sure.
And one could argue that without knowing how bad the system is, that it is very difficult to find out where to fix it.
Well, Desha, now if you talk about the knowledge of governance, where are we now? Is it because the people who are in power at the moment are they knowledgeable? So we are coming with, I mean, we are not just coming out of, very shallow. We have done our homework. There's a huge think tank behind this. Even when we came out with this manifesto and our policy manual, there was a lot of thinking. Even I myself, when I received this, I scanned it in my mind, because implementation is the key. Most of the things in this country, there's talk and more talk, but nothing gets implemented. So I scanned it in my mind, because as the leader of the country, you ought to be able to implement it. It is only when I was 100% sure that I could implement it that I declared I am going to challenge this system, I am going to contest for the presidency.
Mr. Pallewatta, you are the leader of the Social Democratic Party of Sri Lanka.
Sure.
Is that a registered political party?
Well, not yet.
Not yet.
Yes.
You will contest under that banner if you contest for presidency?
Well, if we get the registration before the elections, yes. But the law of the land is such, before getting a registration, you have to operate as a political party under that name and logo for at least 4 years.
Right.
Minimum 4 years. That is a requirement.
So
we are going through that process right now.
Right.
So therefore, the moment we complete that, we will be applying for registration. But if the presidential election comes before that, of course, as I said, there are more than 70 registered parties in this country. So I will have to get the help of one of these registered parties to forward my nomination.
Right. Shahan? Mr. Pallewatta, you're right in one sense. You're saying you're talking about a fresh approach. Yes. And it's true that we have seen, in fact, when you talk to a lot of people, they say that they have, even some of the strongest UMP supporters have become quite disheartened by what's happened in the recent past. And even also on where the former government is concerned, what happened in October last year, some of them were quite confused about all that.
Sure.
And there's a lot of people who are looking at a new way. So you have that in your favor. But all that being said, as Deshan also asked you these questions, the bottom line is you have to be able to come in there and actually bring about a true change that will bring results for this country. And let's just get into one issue that's right now a hot topic. You have the SOFA, the AXA. Sri Lanka is stuck in between this international issue. You have China, you have the US, you have India. What is your stance on this issue?
Well, actually now, in this country, the moment agreement or whatever comes into light, the next day there is opposition, right, without going into the nitty-gritties of the agreement. So we ought to have our dialogues based on empirical evidence. If a country is to leap forward, one of the things that I advocate for my country is that we should base all our arguments, our discussions, everything on empirical evidence, not on hearsay. So most of these agreements are having good features which are beneficial to the country, right? So we got to capitalize on them. If there is anything that is detrimental, I do not think anyone has the right to shove down our throat these agreements, because agreement is between two parties, and we are also equally, we have the bargaining power, right? But of course, I agree that certain countries, of course, they have economic power and the political power. But then that does not necessarily mean, as a sovereign state, that we have to give in. Even small countries like Singapore, they still remain independent. So we can take a cue from that.
Because I'm sure you agree, right now there's a very serious concern about Sri Lanka sovereignty.
Sure.
Over this SOFA agreement. Actually, I believe Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardana, you have something to say in this regard. What do you say about the SOFA agreement? What is actually happening here?
Well, there have been a lot of talk, and I also take from Rohan's point. We have to actually base our discussions on the facts and figures and empirical evidence, but unfortunately our discussions are on very much either on ideological grounds or actually if we oppose to a particular party, then if that party is doing whatever that party is doing, it's wrong. I think that should not be the case. We should weigh any agreement based on the facts and figures, and we have to see, given the present context, how do we understand. As far as I know, there is no so far agreement signed by Sri Lankan government. There had been a proposal, and proposal is in discussion, not only for Sri Lanka, but many countries are actually engaged in discussion.
But then, Mr. Gunawardhan, if I can just pitch in there for one moment, this government from day one has been acting in a shroud of secrecy. I mean, I'm pretty sure you'd agree with me if I say the lack of information coming out of this government has been a pertinent issue that has always come around and really hit this government hard. Why can't someone come forward and say, look, this is the agreement that we are discussing, these are the terms of the agreement. Instead, we have to learn of these agreements and of the terms of these agreements and of the consequences that the country will have to go through as a result of these agreements being endorsed, behind closed doors, mind you, through reports published on newspapers and so on and so forth. Why can't the government just come out there and say it, put it into the public for a debate?
It would have been very easier if the government would come forward and explain these things, but actually there is a communication gap in this government. I think it's inherited because the nature of this government is that you have for the first time in the history two major parties which were actually fighting each other forged an alliance. So obviously there are a lot of differences, and also within the parties there's differences. So I don't see necessarily a bad thing. As Charitha pointed out, democracy is a very chaotic thing, but at the end, and democracy, there's a cost for democracy, but at the end, finally, it provides a room to have more discussions and more informed decision making process. But still, having said that, I would believe that government should have come forward and explain to the public, because government owes to the public.
Right.
But as far as the SOFA is concerned, there is no SOFA.
It's only in the pipeline.
It's only in the pipeline, something that, but there is no commitment or nothing has been signed.
Mr. Gunawardhan, if I may, before we hand it back to Shalan for the final round, Mr. Pallewatta, the Social Democratic Party of Sri Lanka, who do you think the presidential candidate is going to be?
By party?
Yes.
I have already announced it's
Right.
Yes.
Dr. Charitha
Very
Herath,
clear.
who do you think is going to be the candidate from the SLPP?
I think SLPP candidate would be Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardana, who do you think the UNP's candidate is going to be?
I cannot say for the UNP, but then the General Secretary of the party, Mr. Ativiraj Kariwasam, in a press conference 2 weeks ago, categorically said that party has not decided the candidate, and party will start campaign from the 1st of July, will decide on the candidate once the presidential election is announced.
So no guesses?
No guesses. No.
No guesses. All right. Shalan?
Thank you very much to our journalist as well as our panelists. Now you can start changing the community around you, the country around you daily, no matter what small decisions that you make. And a part of these small decisions, a not so small decision, is who are you going to vote for at the upcoming elections. Maybe this final round at Face the Nation might provide you with a little bit of incentives on why you should vote for the candidates that come before you. Stay tuned. We will be back with more on Face the Nation. Welcome back. You're watching the final round of Face the Nation for today. Taking a quote from an eminent world leader, Nelson Mandela. He said, "Real leaders must be ready to sacrifice everything for the freedom of their people." Soon, Sri Lankans will be given the choice of electing their leaders. Will Sri Lankans choose wisely? We are here to help you make that decision. Moving to our panelists for their final remarks. Dr. Charitha Herath, Senior Lecturer, University of Peradeniya. Sir, we've had quite a productive discussion right now, and as you mentioned before, you said that possibly Gotabaya Rajapaksa would be the presidential candidate for the upcoming elections. In this final round, I'd like to direct to you one question that would require quite a swift answer given the time constraints that have been imposed upon us. One question that everybody in the opposing factions keep on asking the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, the joint opposition if you may, why does it have to be a member of the Rajapaksa family? I do understand that they have a certain flair, and of course President Mahinda Rajapaksa did after all liberate the country from a 30-year-long terrorism along with the armed forces, mind you. But again, still, why aren't there any other candidates, any other possible names coming out of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna other than just another Rajapaksa?
No, like there might be some new leaders coming into SLPP in future. That is depending on the context. At the moment, President Rajapaksa was the most popular leader from our side, from SLP side then, and there are some other leaders in the party as well. But at the moment, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's name has been suggested by many different factions within the party and within
many of the members of the SLPP say that they do not know who the next candidate is, that the decision will be made by the Rajapaksa family. They come out and they say it openly.
It is half truth thing. Like what was said was like the party said that we could request President Rajapaksa to take the final word. So that was the decision that was, you know, colored.
But if someone accuses your party of nepotism, how would you respond to that?
It is not true at all. This party has been started very near past, and we have been working towards this upcoming elections, and it would have a very long future, and there might be many different leaders in this party and even leading this party in future. That is not at all, that not any particular family. At the moment, President Rajapaksa is the most popular leader among our camp. So then he is leading the party.
Even members of the other parties that support the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, Vasudeva Nanayakkara's party, he came out and he said there are no discussions being held about a presidential candidate. I don't know what's going on.
Well, there are different kind of point of views by different personalities. That is true. But at the moment, SLPP, within the SLPP, there is a discussion, and JO there is a discussions, and the related parties are also discussing. I think that there would be a very common and very accepted decisions be taken. But very important issue is that we think that this upcoming presidential election is a very important platform for us to discuss couple of related issues. One is the economic policy for our country in next decade, next future, and the international relations and security are two different very important issues, and the restructuring the government state structure of this country would be another very important one. So these are the areas that we are dealing at the moment to form policy documents for our presidential campaign, and leader is ready, and the candidate is ready, the policy is ready. We are getting ready to fight for this coming election.
The candidate has not been announced as yet. Thank you very much, though.
It will be announced in due course, yeah.
And we will be keeping a close watch until and after the candidate is announced, of course. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Charita Herath. Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, presidential candidate. Is your party still in the discussion phase, or have you moved on from that and come out with solutions, proposals, a policy, a reason for the general public of Sri Lanka to vote you in? You are a clean slate to the political arena of Sri Lanka. Why should the people vote for you?
Exactly. The reason is now there is a thick carapace of insensibility that has grown out of the collective psyche of the nation due to mismanagement, corruption and so on. So to induce the necessary catharsis to this situation is the responsibility of any social relevant individual or institute, and we are taking that task, and we are right there for the people, addressing this task and providing this necessary catharsis, addressing their issues, and we are taking full responsibility to get the country back on the right track.
What are your proposals, if I may ask, in quite a short period of time? I know it's very hard to elaborate, but
Sure.
just if you could throw us some bullet points on what you plan on doing with our country if you are elected to office.
Well, first thing is we want to get into 10,000 per capita within 5 years. And we have tangible plans. As you said, the time does not permit me to elaborate on those things. We have taken a stock of the mineral resources of this country. So we have a fast track of getting the country up to 10,000 per capita within 5 years. So that is one thing that I can stress at this moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohan Pallewatta. Finally, coming to Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardena. Out of all the panelists, you are the person who is closely affiliated to this government. Of course, you are not a member of parliament or any of that. So it'll be unfair for me to pose too much of a hard question, but I mean, representing the government faction here on this program, these questions will be posed to you and you will have to inevitably answer them. So Dr. Charitha Herath said that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, or at least Rajapaksa, would be the possible candidate from the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna. Of course, Mr. Rohan Pallewatta has been bold enough to come out and say that he is a presidential candidate. Why is the United National Party not announcing a candidate? Of course, there are calls from the general public for certain leading figures in the United National Party. However, is it Party leader Ranil Wickremesinghe who is holding the announcement back? What's happening inside?
Well, as you said, I mean, I cannot speak for the UNP, but then my understanding is that the party leaders have mentioned that party will make a decision based on democratic discussion within the party structures.
With all due respect to you, sir, the United National Party has not been the party known for their democracy within the party during the past few years. So, I mean, it will be fair if the general public do look at the situation in, you know, a little skeptically.
Yeah, I mean, skepticism is not a bad thing, but you have to compare with other parties. Now, other leading parties, in which party you have the democratic decision making process. Now, as Charitha mentioned, that their decision, they have asked their most popular leader to make the decision. So that's the political culture in this country. And if you take SLFP, the same situation. SLFP, the president is the leader. The president is making the call, nobody else. There is no decision making process. So UNP is far better than compared to that situation. There is an executive committee and the parliamentary group will decide. But again, my point is, next president is not as important as the present president, because after the 19th amendment, next president will have very less power. This president have the transitional power. That's why this president is able to hold ministerial portfolios. After the end of the term of this president, the next president, according to the Article 42 of the Constitution, the cabinet of ministers are responsible to the parliament, not the president. The executive function lies with the cabinet of ministers. So president will not hold any ministerial portfolio, and president will have to run the government based on the policies of the government party, which has the majority in the parliament. So therefore, next president is not as important as people think. So therefore, party will decide what form, because end of the day, we have made a promise in 2015 that we will abolish executive presidency. We still abide by that policy decision, and we have been working towards that. So this process will be completed in the next phase. So therefore, the presidential will be a transitional position. I think even for SLPP, they have their most popular leader out there, and that leader will choose somebody to contest the presidency, because then the most popular leader will hold the key. So I think both parties, SLPP and UNP, sees that the parliament will be the battleground. So the parliament will be the real seat of power, and parliament will decide what power the future president will have. So all the Commonwealth countries, if you look at, have the parliamentary democracy. It was only Sri Lanka was moving a different direction, but our tradition, if you take UK and the Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all these Commonwealth countries, and the largest democracy, India, which is a very powerful country, has the prime ministerial system. So therefore, I think our future lies in that direction where Parliament has the power and Parliament will make decisions. So the process is that to strengthen the legislation. So I think we will be going towards that direction. So we are not very much concerned about who's going to be the presidential candidate for that matter. That's my take.
So I believe we had quite a healthy discussion about the upcoming elections, the evolution of elections, how we got to where we are. And this discussion, of course, would not have been possible if not for the eminent panelists who humbly accepted our invitation and joined us on our program tonight. So my thanks goes out to Dr. Charitha Herup, who is of course a senior lecturer at the University of Peradeniya. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable comments here on the show. Also with us tonight was Mr. Rohan Pallewatta, the leader of the Social Democratic Party of Sri Lanka, the man bold enough to announce himself as a presidential candidate even before the other mainstream parties in the country. And last and certainly not least, thank you very much to Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardena, the advisor to the Ministry of Policy Planning. Thank you very much for your valuable comments on this show. And we're not done yet. Two more people who without this show would not have been possible is our journalist on tonight's show, Mr. Deshan Gonawala. Thank you very much. Shehan Ranatunga for assisting us in conducting this show. And finally, a big thank you out to all our viewers out there. It's you who can finally make the change here in this country. What kind of a country would you want your children to live in? What kind of a future would you want for yourself? We have made quite a lot of mistakes in our past, but the greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, but rising up every time we fail. And if I can allude this to a pertinent example, it would be the current World Cup that's going on, the Cricket World Cup, the performance of the Sri Lankan team. Of course, every time we think that they cannot come back up, they come and prove us wrong. Also wishing them all the best and wishing you, the general public, a very good night. Please do make a wise decision when you vote. Vote the right people into power and you will be guaranteed of a better future. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and God bless.